If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
It's all over. So now what comes next? EJ Stewart, Tommy Beer. This is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, an Audacy WFAN original. We're talking New York Knicks basketball now that the season is over. What happens with the New York Knicks? What happens this offseason? What do they do with some of the players on their roster? We'll break that all down, and I'll ask Tommy whether or not he thinks this 2022-2023 season was a success. So all that coming up. Also, some pretty major rumors regarding some Knicks players, or excuse me, maybe future Knicks players already. Not Knicks players yet, but players on other teams that the Knicks may be targeting, one being Karl-Anthony Towns. I'll ask Tommy whether or not Karl-Anthony Towns would be a good fit here in New York. And not only Cat is another all-star big that people are talking about linked to the Knicks. Another one, a big man down in Philly, just had a pretty ugly end to their postseason. Now questions surrounding whether or not the Knicks could get involved with the Joel Embiid sweepstakes that may potentially happen given the fallout in Philadelphia, which is currently in effect still. We had a firing of Doc Rivers. So I'll talk to Tommy about the Embiid Knicks potential connection as well. So all that coming up on Orange and Blue Bloods. But first, Tommy, how you feeling today?
Feeling fine. Just following up on the podcast last week. Want to thank you guys for your support throughout the regular season. Been fun. Been an exciting ride. And now we get to talk about the offseason. Obviously, there'll be no shortage of topics to discuss and hypothetical trades to bandy about. So should be fun. And thanks again for tuning in. And hope you stick with us through the offseason.
Yes, definitely do want to give a major shout out to the listeners, especially those who checked us out on our live stream on WFAN's YouTube on Friday night after the Knicks Game 6 loss, as rough as it was. I think it was great to get everybody together to talk about their feelings, talk about what's been going down, and talk about what the Knicks may be looking into when it comes to this offseason. So the support has been awesome, and thank you guys so much for that. And keep rocking with us, because if there's any team that's worth doing an offseason podcast for, it is the New York Knicks. Sometimes it's not necessarily things that happen, but just the chatter around the Knicks during the offseason is enough to continue a podcast. So we're going to still be here. So thank you guys again for checking us out. And this kind of begins the first episode of Orange and Blue Bloods post the Knicks season. And again, this is a podcast that you can get wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit that auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop. Also, check us out on YouTube. You can catch us on the WFAN page as well as the Audacy Sports page. So let's begin talking about what comes next. So reality at this point is set in that Knicks basketball is officially over for this season after the Knicks lost Game 6 to Miami on Friday. Media members were not invited to the team's exit meetings following that loss. So basically whatever you heard in the press conference that post game is what you got going into the offseason. I guess maybe until they talk at the draft, maybe. I mean, they don't even do that very often. So who knows next time you'll hear from Knicks brass? Who knows next time you'll hear from Tom Thibodeau? But nonetheless, the season is over, and we are now in the offseason for the New York Knicks. Talking about this season that just happened, you saw a 10-win increase from your Knickerbockers this year, finishing 47-35, a first-round series win over the Cleveland Cavaliers. Individually, Knicks saw some great successes from the likes of Jalen Brunson, their free agent signing, who excelled and turned into a star this season. Julius Randle earned his second All-NBA and All-Star selections this year. Emmanuel Quickley finished second in Sixth Man of the Year voting. So plenty to be proud of when it comes to this next season. When we look at the offseason, there are plenty of guaranteed spots already on the roster. So this is not necessarily a roster in flux per se. But this will still be a crucial offseason. You got Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin, who are extension eligible. You got Josh Hart, who can opt out of his deal to become a free agent. The rumors have been that is almost certainly to happen, that he may then re-up with the Knicks shortly afterwards. And then when you talk about some of the guys that are on the team, but perhaps could be shipped elsewhere and have their services sent to other places, Derrick Rose right now has a $15 million club option that can be declined by the Knicks this offseason and maybe likely to be declined, because that number would get the Knicks under the luxury tax that they're currently in if they decide to decline Derrick Rose's $15.5 million team option. Another player not expected to be back is Evan Fournier. He said after Friday's loss, quote, My season was over a long time ago. It took me a good month to understand that. Obviously, there's going to be some changes, and I'm going to get traded. Evan Fournier was very quick to point out that he does not foresee himself returning to the Knicks this season. So, long off season ahead, Tommy. Before we get to that, when you look at what the Knicks did this year, can you deem this season a success for the New York Knicks?
Yeah, no question, in my opinion. I mean, you just look at reality. First 13 years of this century, Knicks didn't win a playoff game. Won one playoff game, I should say, rather. Then we had the 2012-2013 team that went to the second round and lost to Indiana. And then in the 7 years since, Knicks won one playoff game 2 years ago versus Atlanta. So for the Knicks to win 6 postseason games, basically to be on the verge of potentially going to the Eastern Conference Finals, of bouncing the ball this way, bounce the ball that way. Obviously exceeding expectations by any metric in terms of wins and losses during the regular season. First round sweep of Cleveland, their best postseason showing, more impressive than
a gentleman's sweep, not a. It felt like a sweep in many ways, but
right, correct.
Yeah.
A pounding, a gentleman's
Yes.
sweep of the Cavs. Their most impressive postseason showing, more impressive than the Knicks' victory over the Celtics during the mellow 2012-2013. So the most impressive playoff series the Knicks have played, since Patrick Ewing and Allen Houston and Latrell Sprewell were part of things. So, I think without question, and most importantly, they found out they have a cornerstone piece. They found a point guard, which they haven't had forever. I definitely think this season qualifies as success.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's a success, and for that reason, I'm gonna say we give the Knicks a little bit of a round of applause here. I know there's been a lot of hard feelings given how this season has gone, or at least how the season ended, and I think that happens when you have high intense playoff games. You have a chance to go a certain level, and perhaps you kind of lose sight of what was accomplished this season. I don't want to lose sight of that. I mean, this was a Knicks team that many people are predicted to not even win more than 40 games this year. A lot of people saying they'd probably be lucky to be a 9th or 10th seed in the Eastern Conference, given how strong the East looked coming into this season. A lot of all the other teams making big moves. The Knicks to come into this year, you sign Brunson, you sign Hart and sign. You make some of those moves. You trade for Hart during the midseason trade deadline. You can't say enough about how fun it was to follow this team. How it was stressful at times, especially early on, but how fun it became to follow this team and how much growth you saw from so many of their players. And I think particularly you talk about Brunson, Emmanuel quickly, despite a poor postseason, had an exceptional regular season. Julius Randle having the best regular season of his career. RJ Barrett having the best postseason of his career, which I think is important to point out now when we talk about the totality of the season. So a lot of bright spots. You can't look at this and say this was a failure. Maybe it feels like a missed opportunity for sure. I think that's maybe more fair when you think of, you're playing the 8th seed, the Heat, and you're one Jalen Brunson turnover away from getting to Game 7 in New York. Maybe you feel like it's a missed opportunity, but I think that the stars are aligning in a good way for the Knicks moving forward. I think we're going to talk a lot about these potential players that may be coming in here in the next few years.
Yeah, no question. Like you said, the frustration lies in the fact that the Knicks probably left a little meat on the bone. It was a winnable series against Miami, obviously as the 8th seed. They were, after they knocked off the Bucks, you figure they did a lot of the heavy lifting for you, and a path to the Eastern Conference Finals had opened up for you and possibly beyond, because we saw the Sixers collapse and the Celtics advance, and obviously Tatum's awesome. They have a great deep team, but they've certainly looked beatable at times during this postseason. The Hawks, can sweat a little bit. So for that reason, there's certainly frustration, palpable frustration, and understandable frustration among the fan base, given the way that the season played out. It wasn't like Jimmy Butler went nuts and averaged 50, and you didn't have a chance. Basically, most of the games they lost, 3 of the 4 games they lost against Miami, they had a good chance to win. Randle playing poorly, not playing with effort on several occasions for quarters and games at a time. leaves you with a sour taste in your mouth. RJ, despite his terrific all-around impressive postseason, going 1 for 10 in that Game 6 loss, and the Knicks still being there down one possession, final 30 seconds of the contest, leaves you a little bit frustrated. But again, benefit of time, a couple deep breaths, a few walks around the block, and you can look at the bigger picture. Draft capital, young, promising players on the roster, locked into team-friendly rookie contracts. Brunson at point guard, a lot of option, a lot of roster flexibility, some cap space they can play with, and we'll kind of get into all that. But yeah, looking at the big picture, and just over the last 12 months, Knicks are in a far better position than they were, than they were at this time last year.
Absolutely, and let's talk about this time last year compared to where they come into this season. So this time last year, you're talking about having to unload half the roster, essentially. So many guys just being kind of unplayable for the Knicks moving forward. Kemba Walker, Nerlens Noel, Alec Burks was unplayable, but he was the guy that had to get out of here. Knicks in a different spot coming into this offseason. One, you have not nearly as many guys, coming up on free agent deals, things like that. And number two, you have a lot of good players, guys, that I think you want to kind of build around or perhaps turn into maybe bigger players, bigger stars. So let's start with the Josh Hart situation. Any chance Josh Hart leaves in your eyes? You think that it's almost a lock that he stays with the Knicks? He can't opt out of that $12 million he has left on his deal. The rumors and the word is that the expectation is that he will sign a deal maybe around that ballpark, maybe a little north of that, 3 or 4 years with the Knicks. Do you expect to see that?
I expect to, but that's a big difference between the question, is there any chance that he leaves? Yeah. Anytime you're talking about free agency, just for the details here, Josh Hart has $12.9 million coming his way in 23-24. That's next season. So that's a player option, which means he has until next month to opt out of that contract. And at that point, he becomes an unrestricted free agent. And anytime you talk about unrestricted free agency, all bets are off. Do I think he plans on returning to the Knicks? Yes. Do I think the Knicks plan on re-signing him and bringing him back into the fold? Yes, absolutely. But we've seen a million times in a million different sports and a million different spots where the player and the team were aligned going into free agency, and then the player becomes a free agent and the agent gets a call, and Team X is offering $18 million a year over 4 years. They're the final piece to make a championship run. And listen, Brunson, I love you. Tibbs, you're a good dude. Leon Rose, I love you, but listen, I just had twins. The guy's a father, and he's got to do what's best for him and his family. Do I think he'll give the Knicks an opportunity to match any contract he receives? Yes. Do I think the Knicks would match any reasonable contract? Yes, but there is that outlier. There is the possibility that the contract exceeds. There was talk the end of last month that he'd be looking in the $18 to $20 million range, which seems like a very high number. But giving as well as he played over that second half of the regular season, when he was arguably the most impactful, trade addition for any team in the sport, those numbers didn't seem as crazy. The one silver lining, and we'll talk about this, Emmanuel, quickly as well. It's something we've discussed on the pod, for him struggling in that Miami series when his kind of liabilities are exposed. Maybe one of the reasons another team didn't want to trade a first-round pick to Portland was because he was hesitant to shoot the three-pointer during the first half of the season with the Blazers, and didn't shoot at a particularly good clip. Came to the Knicks, was Steph Curry for 2 months, basically didn't miss a three-pointer. And then in the postseason, teams dared him to shoot. And outside of those couple three-pointers in the corner in Game 2, really struggled with his outside shot, which limited his effectiveness because, he's great at creating, semi-fast break transition, finishing in the lane, etc. But when the teams really give you 5 to 10 feet, you're not able to kind of take advantage of that runway. You can kind of see why his game is somewhat limited due to his inconsistent three-point shooting. That's multiplied when you play with a kind of shoot-first point guard, a non-traditional point guard like Jalen Brunson, who really needs the center of the floor open to operate. Yeah. We saw when he was on the floor with Hart as opposed to with Grimes, the numbers are exponentially different in terms of his effective field goal percentage, shot attempts in the paint. Brunson, I'm speaking of. So ideally, you want to have shooters and spacers on the floor with Brunson. All that said, Hart proved his value, probably best suited to be a sixth man. The question then becomes, and we'll talk about this for the next few weeks and few months, what's the right price? Is it, again, he'll make at least $13 million in the offseason, so it makes no sense for him not to opt out of the contract. Should he, again, worst case scenario, he can re-sign for 1 year and $13 million, and then, so he doesn't lose anything. Teams are going to offer him at least 3 years at, I would say, at a minimum of 12, 13 million a year. So you're looking at 40 million guaranteed as opposed to 13. Question is, does some other team get involved and force the Knicks to up the ante $15-16 million annually times 3 times 4? That's when things get tricky, complicated, and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting because this is a weird offseason where you don't have a bunch of teams with a ton of cap space.
Right.
I think going into this offseason, really only the Rockets and Pacers have, and the Spurs have considerable cap space. A lot of teams can create cap space through not pick up options and things of that nature. But you're not going to have a bunch of teams with, $50 million laying around. So if you have a team that's going to make, one big signing or 2 big signings, is Josh Hart going to be the guy, and our team's going to be willing to outbid the Knicks to make sure they get Josh Hart? You think that would take probably one of these teams that are closer to competing for a championship to do that, and all those teams seem to be capped out. So I would be surprised if Josh Hart was gone.
That's a good point, because the teams that have the cap space to kind of outbid the Knicks, they are not one piece away, and Josh Hart at age 28 is like a one piece away guy.
Yeah, I mean, are the Rockets, giving Josh Hart $20 million? Are the Magic giving? I'm looking at teams with the highest projected practical cap space. The Spurs, Jazz. I mean, these are teams that I can't see them, because I think the number is going to be something between $15 and $16 million that I think he probably caps out at the most he would probably get. Do I think he's going to get that for any of those teams? That would surprise me. So I think that he'll be here. I think he knows that this is his best spot for him. Josh Hart in that series against the Miami Heat shot, I believe, 23% from the 3-point line, which was nothing like how he shot in the regular season for the Knicks. He shot almost 50%, or more than over 50% from 3. So I do think that may hurt his value a little bit. This idea that he's a floor spacer really kind of got exposed a little bit against Miami. So that'll bring his price down. I think when it comes to these guys with the extensions, Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin, that becomes this very interesting conversation. Because for Emmanuel Quickley, again, how much does the playoffs come into effect? I mean, he was stellar for the entire regular season. But how much does that poor postseason come into effect? And what does Emmanuel Quickley see himself as? Because if you're talking about Emmanuel Quickley as a backup guard, to me, like, the max value for that kind of player, you've seen, it's kind of the contract Derrick Rose is about to get bounced from. The 3 years to $43 million. He's an older player, but even the deals that Clarkson has gotten, the deal Tyus Jones got, he's the highest paid backup point guard. He's making about $14 million a year. I mean, is Emmanuel Quickley? You would think he's going to maybe reset the market, but how much further is he going beyond maybe what Tyus Jones got from the Memphis Grizzlies? I think that would be one of the interesting things to follow.
Really good. I think that Tyus Jones comparison is really good. Who's a player that may not have as high ceiling as IQ, but his floor is really high, consistent, always near the top of the league in terms of assist to turnover ratio. But the thing that IQ has on his side is youth. Jordan Poole signed a 4-year, $128 million contract. IQ could easily say, listen, I'm a better player. I'm a more valuable player than Jordan Poole. And he is, especially when you consider what he brings to both sides of the floor. But again, that's the outlier. I'm sure the Warriors regret that decision.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would sign Poole to that this time around.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So, whereas Hart is like, I think we feel comfortable saying his floor is probably like 13, 14. His ceiling's probably like 16, 17, probably land somewhere in that. I think IQ, you can go in the other direction. I'm sure some GM thinks, listen, undersized 2 guard, point guard, he did, we saw he's been inconsistent, from time to time. We saw if he doesn't, if his shot isn't falling, he's a tough time contributing offensively. We saw it in the postseason. So maybe he's only worth 10 to 12 million a year. On the other side of the coin, you look at the bigger picture, you look at his full body of work, particularly the postseason. When IQ was the 3rd best player on the Knicks night in, night out, especially
in regular season, yeah.
The regular season, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
When you factor in his contributions again on both sides of the floor, highest plus minus on the team by
Yeah.
significant margin. Knicks are a better team with Emmanuel quickly on the floor. I think they understand that they need to keep him. I think he knows that they know that they really want to keep him. So it'll be very interesting. And again, he's only extension eligible, which means the Knicks can also kick the can down the road.
That's true.
The fear there is that he becomes a restricted free agent, and then you get into the DeAndre Ayton scenario, which, listen, IQ is not on near the level in terms of impact and desirability throughout the league that Ayton was, the former number 1 overall pick. And even in that scenario, the Knicks have the right to match any offer, so they still wouldn't lose him. So he's 2 years away from being an unrestricted free agent. That being said, there is it certainly could be argued that it is beneficial for both the player and the team to avoid distractions and have the player locked in and possibly lock him in at a discount. In my opinion, it would make a lot of sense for the Knicks to try to lock him up now, especially if they can get him at a little bit of a discount coming off that poor postseason. But those are the things that Leon Rose is going to have to weigh. I think it all comes down to what IQ is willing to settle for, because I think the Knicks will go up to 15 plus a year. But if he's looking, no, I want 80 million over 4 years, I want 90 million over 4 years, that's when Rose and company might say, listen, that's a little bit too rich for us. Come back another season. We love you. But then we'll reassess next summer.
Yeah. The quickly thing, I think maybe it's just, maybe I'm just being kind of like an alarmist or not. Maybe I'm being, too defeatist in terms of how this is going to work out. But this is a part of me that kind of wonders if this thing may be a lot more of a contentious negotiation than I think a lot of folks realize. Because he kind of reminds me a little bit in like the Terry Rozier kind of lane where Rozier was before he signed the deal with Charlotte, where he was kind of stuck as a backup who could clearly start. And when he started, he played really well. And like those guys, we saw with Jalen Brunson. And I mean, like if you have a point guard, like that can take you a long way. And if you got a guy who right now is locked into a backup role, I mean, he's never going to be a starter with the Knicks as long as Jalen Brunson's here. If Emmanuel quickly sees himself as a starter in the NBA, what is his incentive to sign an extension other than security, obviously? What is the incentive to sign an extension for backup money? We can say, well, let me just play this season out and then see what I get on the restricted free agent market. Maybe one of these teams that is desperate for a point guard decide, hey, we're going to just like this Charlotte Hornets was, we're going to throw as much money as we can at somebody. Like, I don't know if you remember, Terry Rozier actually talked about that offseason. He thought he was going to the Knicks. And it was Charlotte, like similar to the Josh Hart situation you were kind of alluding to that could happen. Charlotte came out of nowhere and said, hey, here's this big bag of money, dude, to be our starting point guard. He's all right. I guess I'm going to Charlotte. So I that is a scenario quickly that I think will be interesting. We know a lot about how much he values playing in New York, playing at the Garden, playing for the Knicks. I think it matters to him, but I also thinking of quickly, like, he's one of the few Knicks players that have actually had a lot of profiles written about them over the last few years. Knicks have that kind of tough media, policy. He's a very driven guy. I mean, he writes down his goals. He has big visions for himself. He's obviously a workout warrior by all accounts. He's a guy who's a gym rat. I'm not as certain that he'll be willing to just say, I'll take, solid backup money, even if it does reset the market to be a Knick, if I can maybe become a starter somewhere else. I think that's going to be a very interesting thing to follow for the next summer and maybe even 2 summers.
I mean, you make a good point there. He doesn't have to look very far. The guy right in front of him was a backup for however long.
Exactly.
And got offered the 4-year, $55 million, and said, "Nah, I'm gonna roll the dice." And and then Doncic got hurt, so he started 25 plus 30 games. Once he got into the starting lineup for the Mavericks, never came out, and tripled his doubled his value, went from 55 million to 100 plus million from the Knicks, and now after starting for a year, could get max money from a team if you want to hit the free agent market. So you're right. A lot of very interesting will depend on what he feels, on what his team feels, what he values security. Maybe they do a shorter extension. Maybe instead of the 4 years he could sign, he signs for 2, locks him up, and then, tacked on to the final 3 years. So he becomes a free agent, after that 8 years of experience, and, then he can sign a bigger contract. Or maybe the Knicks are willing to say, listen, we value him. I understand that it's starter money, but the cap's rising. We think, he's worth 18 to he's worth $20 million a year. So And there's an argument to be made there, in terms of this team and this value. You don't want to run Brunson to the ground. I'm sure Leon Rose is going to talk to Tibbs about reducing his minutes. Next season we'll see if Tibbs listens, but I'm sure that'll be a focal point. Having a guy like IQ that can start at the point guard, that can come off the bench, that can start at the 2 guard, that can play in 3 guard rotations is incredibly valuable. And the Knicks say, hey, we 90 for 4. We're putting it on the table. If you think you're worth 120 million, that we can't do, but we want to show you we're committed to keeping you here. And maybe the next trade for another big star, and they have to lock in that money, to keep him around. So there's a lot of different ways you can go. You're right, but I think that's kind of the most interesting scenario to play itself out, because they're different. It will see which side incentivizes security versus risk and all that other cool stuff.
Yeah, if we're saying that IQ is the 3rd best player on the team, well, the guy who's the 3rd highest paid player, RJ Barrett, he's making 23 next year, 25, 27, 29 million. I mean, I don't want to be, I'm not trying to run quickly out of town for sure, but I'm just being realistic about what may come with this negotiation. And lastly, quickly, just on Fournier and Rose, I mean, there's no chance those guys, I guess, are back in your eyes.
Rose, they will not renew. Obviously not worth $15+ million a year. That's a team option, so they will decline that team option. I could see Rose coming back in the Udonis Haslem role if he so chooses. Obviously, him and Tibbs are close. He's developed a relationship with the front office and the players in the team. So would he want to come back and just kind of be like a mentor, all that other stuff? Rose is an amazing. Here's a story if you ever hear him talk and kind of discuss what he's come from. Sleeping in a room with, 8, in a 1-bedroom apartment with 8 brothers and sisters. And, a lot of his family's been in jail, in and out of the prison system. And so to see where he comes, he's an inspiring player in person. Fournier, I am not, I understand he wants to get traded. The Knicks want to trade him. The Knicks want to do right by him, et cetera. That doesn't mean that he will be traded this offseason. I could see a scenario in which they can't move him, or then they're unwilling to attach draft capital to move him, so they keep him on the roster. Whether he shows up and doesn't come to training camp, he might
end up being a Jay Crowder situation.
That could definitely be a scenario where he's just not with the team but still on the roster, and then they try to package that salary in a deal at the trade deadline and/or waive him after the deadline, and he's free to sign with whoever he wants. But just because he doesn't have a place on the roster, and again, from the Knicks standpoint, they have invested this much money. They want to do right by the player, but they also listen. If RJ sprains his ankle and Grimes is hurt, they need somebody. And he's one of the only players in franchise history to make more than 200 3-pointers in a season. The guy can obviously still shoot. So there is some value there. It's not like they could. It's not like the NFL where they could waive him and only 3% of his cap hit. So they're not just going to waive him and eat that salary. So for those reasons, I wouldn't be shocked if I saw him return. I think it's obviously unlikely, but it can happen.
Yeah, I thought that. I didn't really love. I know some people kind of were giving him. I didn't really love these comments, to be honest. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter. He doesn't want to be here, but like, I mean, the team just lost, and he's talking about himself. Like, I don't know. I thought he should have just said nothing. Maybe talk a day later or 2 days later, or he could have did an interview with somebody. It seemed very calculated that he wanted to get out there that, hey, I'm going to be traded, and kind of force the Knicks' hand in a way to maybe say, hey, if it's hard to trade me, you're going to have to get rid of me because I'm already telling the media that I'm not going to be here.
I'll give him a pass because he was quiet during the season. He could have.
That is true.
He's a guy making $18 million a year. He obviously sees himself as a starting shooting guard in the NBA. True. He's one of the best players in Europe. I'm sure he's thinking, listen, let me go. I can start for Real Madrid, or he was excellent.
Yeah.
Leading them to gold medals. Like he's an incredibly respected international player. He doesn't want to be sitting behind Miles McBride and guys that he feels he's better than. I don't disagree with the decision to sit him, but he's a prideful player. And so I appreciate. I think he gets credit for being quiet as long as he did. I think he was waiting to say, listen, I don't view. They may see me as a bum. I'm not a bum.
That is fair. I think that is fair because yes, he could have caused problems during the season and he did not. I just thought, I thought, well, whether I like it or not, I do think it was calculated. I think his agent said, hey, get out there, 100%. Tell them you're not going to be back. So we can kind of get the ball rolling on getting you to your next team. Because I thought that was really it was kind of jarring to come out of that game. And that was kind of the biggest thing that came out of the game. That Evan Fournier says that he's not going to be back. So, but the season barely got finished wrapping up, and you got Fournier talking, and then now we got speculation about stars who could be coming to the Knicks this offseason. So it started with T-Wolves forward Karl-Anthony Towns. And that was the biggest thing that gained a lot of buzz this weekend. According to Eric Pincus of Bleacher Report, several NBA sources over the past couple of years have expressed that they believe the Knicks will ultimately end up with Karl-Anthony Towns, a CAA client. He also noted in the Bleacher Report article other names that Knicks could be attached to are Bradley Beal, Kyle Kuzma, both of the Wizards, and OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors. Now, Towns is set to make $36 million next season before a Supermax deal kicks in beginning in the 2024-2025 season, where he'll make $224 million over 4 seasons. So, Tommy, do you think Cat would be a good fit for the Knicks?
Good fit, yeah. I think in the right scenario, you know, if he's obviously an extremely talented, shooter, helps space the floor a little bit. Better defender, I think, than people give him credit for. His toughness and durability and all those questions are there. If he was a free agent and wanted to sign for $15 million a year, I think certainly, there's a scenario in which it could be beneficial to the Knicks. For a player that's going to make $61.1 million in 27-28, $57 million the year before, $53 million in 2025. Keep in mind, he will make more than Randall and Brunson combined, for 2 of those 3 years. It's just not a possibility. It's not feasible. There's no. I saw one trade. I think it was FanDuel or some account had. Okay, who says no? The Knicks and RJ Barrett and Obi Toppin and 3 first-round draft picks and a swap. I'm like, nah, it's a negative value contract. That's a damaged asset. The Wolves would have to attach draft capital to get rid of Karl-Anthony Towns. So all that, I understand that people want to get out and talk about trades and get our minds off the loss and how can we improve this team. And Karl-Anthony Towns, a pretty good player, a very good player, very good NBA player, a good versatile skill set from New York, New Jersey area. It's been
grew up a Knicks fan.
Yeah, grew up a Knicks fan. Was MSG, was an MSG intern for a while.
Yeah.
Is again, at Kentucky, terrific number one overall pick, all that stuff. Like a really good player. Not what the Knicks need per se. It doesn't really address too many of their needs. Obviously they have Randall and Robinson at center. The fit between Gobert and Towns obviously wasn't great. So if you have Robinson next to Towns, that's not ideal. So there's a lot of other kind of hunky junky stuff out there, but to me, the talk is dead on arrival because I don't see any way Leon Rose is willing to absorb that contract, knowing, again, the salary cap is going to rise. It doesn't look, it's not quite as bad as it seems to the naked eye, but it's pretty bad. And in my opinion, it's a bad allocation of cap space and resources. So for that reason, I wouldn't travel down that route. My sense is if the Knicks wanted to explore the Karl-Anthony Towns option, they could if things go sideways this season, after next season, if there's, I think that player will be available due to his contract. I don't think anyone's coming in and scooping him up. So for that reason, I don't see that as a likely scenario.
Yeah, when I see here in the article, it says several NBA sources are saying this about Karl-Anthony Towns. I'm wondering if those sources are Tim Connolly, are they Chris Finch, are they Alex Rodriguez?
A-Rod.
Yeah. Those got to be the sources because I agree. Like that contract is just it's not tradable to me. Like it is like the new Russell Westbrook contract. Like he's a better player than Russell Westbrook, but the idea that and he's younger, but the idea that anybody's going to take that contract on, it's not gonna be now. It's gonna be later on in the contract, maybe where somebody's just trying to dump a ton of money. But Karl-Anthony Towns, good player, but a guy coming off his worst career year, possibly, like maybe his worst year, at least since he's a rookie. 20 points, only 8 rebounds, only played about 29 games this year. And it's interesting looking at Cat's career because he started off as a very durable player, played all 82 the first 3 games of his career. Now, I know he played some years with Tibbs, so that probably had a lot to do with that. But then even the year after, 77 games. And then it seems like since 2019, he's been dealing with injuries, 35 that year, 50 in the shortened season. That was about 72 games. He misses like 22 there. Then he played a lot of games last year, 74 out of the 82. But then this year, only 29. I mean, I don't know how that's a plus asset at this point. Like, to me, Cat's a negative asset, and I think you make a good point that he doesn't really change. He doesn't really bring anything the Knicks desperately need, other than shooting. Like, he is a good shooter as a big man, and Knicks usually stretch five, but like, he doesn't. If you're talking about adding him to this team as opposed to getting rid of maybe your pick three of Brunson, RJ, and Randall, I don't really know what he kind of brings to the table that's going to help the Knicks, that would help them beat the Heat in that series per se.
He's never won a playoff series. I mean, he averages fewer points than Randall, averages less rebounds than Randall, averages less three-pointers last season than Randall, plays in fewer games than Randall, is not as durable as Randall, and makes twice as much as Randall. So I don't, there's there's that appeal just doesn't. He's a big name. He was a former number one overall pick. All that stuff. Listen, that's the beauty of Brunson, I think, and the kind of the new direction of the franchise is 2 years ago when you had 17 wins and there was no reason to get excited about the Knicks because they have Kevin Knox.
There's a level of desperation.
100%. There was no box office quality. There's no reason to be excited. They couldn't, after they lost out on KD and Kyrie and LeBron said no and Kawhi, and then you have to figure something else out. Then you pivot and say, all right, maybe Towns develops into a superstar. He has the talent. He just doesn't have the toughness. Maybe we can turn it around. The contract's bad, but maybe we get some other cheap, something like that. The Knicks aren't in a position now. That's kind of what I've talked about is the Knicks have the ability now to be selective about stars that hit the market. And Towns isn't even a superstar. He's just an all-star caliber player. So for those reasons, I think the interest and the potential interest, the Knicks' potential interest in Towns has been it greatly exceeds the actual interest would be my assessment.
Yeah, I agree too. Like I said, I tweeted, like, I think to me, like, you would have to attach a lot of first-round picks for me to think that Karl-Anthony Towns would be a viable option for the Knicks. It just
and they don't have any
make sense on any levels. Yeah, they don't have. Yeah, but what picks? They gave them all to Utah. So I mean, again, I feel like there's a lot of reason why Minnesota want to get out there that Karl-Anthony Towns fits with a lot of other places. I can understand why they put that out there, but it being the Knicks, I don't see that. Quickly, any of those other names, Bradley Beal, Kyle Kuzma, OG. I know you talk a lot about OG. What about Beal and Kuzma? Those names intrigue you a little bit?
Beal's contract's just as bad as
yes, it is.
As Towns. I like Beal as a player. He does bring something the Knicks desperately need, which is outside shooting.
Right.
But you give up defensively. You give up age. You give up salary cap flexibility. By bumping. I assume Grimes would be included in the deal because Beal would be your starting two guard. So I'm going to shy away. Again, that's kind of a desperation move. The Knicks don't have to make. The contract just scares me too much. Kuzma, no, thank you. Just kind of an offensive-minded player, a little bit too. I don't think he'd be a good fit in New York. I could see some issues there. I'm sure he'd like to find his way to the Knicks, but that just seems like a bad mix. What was the other name you mentioned?
Oh, and OG was the guy.
OG, yeah. I'm an OG guy. I think it's a little bit complicated now with as well as Barrett played. I think the Barrett situation is the issue with Randall is it puts a holding pattern on some other stuff. What do you do with Obi? Well, we'll find out once we deal with Randall. What do we do with RJ? Well, it depends kind of on what we do with Randall. So there's a lot of things up in the air there.
Yeah, Randall. I think that's a very good way to put it. I think Randall is in some ways kind of like, and that's why I've been so adamant about getting rid of him for so long. Is that I just feel like understanding what the next phase of what Knicks basketball looks like beyond Randall, we just will never know. But it also feels like to keep everybody where they are, like keep RJ where he is as this like weird third option, as another ball dominant guy, and Obi as this like backup four playing 10 minutes a night. Like that doesn't seem like tenable. Like at a certain point, somebody's gonna want to get traded. Somebody's not gonna play well enough to be traded for anything of value. Like it's like that. I agree, does have to be figured out before they get to doing what they're ever going to do with Randall or Randall to determine what they're going to do with Barrett and Obi. But we'll talk about this last thing here because this is something that I don't want to say stunned me, but I was surprised it came out this fast after Philly's exit. So the Sixers eliminated from the playoffs. They got blown out in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference semifinals. And they already faced an uncertain offseason that's become even more uncertain. Doc Rivers was fired this Tuesday as we record this podcast. And some have wondered if the Knicks could be in pursuit of the reigning MVP, Joel Embiid. So Bill Simmons of the Ringer said on this podcast, quote, "The Knicks are just waiting for Embiid to say, time for me to go. They have their relationships. They have Leon and Wes, who are his guys. They've been waiting for this moment, and it's here." And he went on to say that perhaps the Knicks will pull a KD to Suns-like package where they would overpay in order to get Embiid to New York. Meanwhile, Zach Lowe says the team should keep an eye on the Embiid situation, saying Joel loves Philly. Philly loves him. He loves being loved in Philly and understand what that means. I think it would be hard for him to follow the superstar thing and I'm forcing my way out of here model. But if James leaves, you're relying on Maxey to take a giant leap, putting some pieces together. I know that these teams with assets are looking around saying, whoa, if I'm the Knicks, all these Karl-Anthony Towns rumors are going to start now. Forget that. I have a good team. I have Brunson, who's an awesome point guard. I still got all these chips. Towns ain't the guy I'm playing those chips for. Embiid, that's the guy I'm playing all these chips for. So do you think it's possible, or even beyond that, do you think the Knicks will become players for Embiid if all of this plays out and he does one out?
No question. Absolutely. I think that the Knicks will, they would be derelict in their duties if they didn't fully explore every opportunity to get a player of Embiid's character, quality. Listen, is he injury prone? Yes. Can you rely on a playoff? I don't know. If he's available, you have all these chips. You have a point guard. Zach Lowe summed it up perfectly. The reason you kept all these chips is to get, how much more valuable can a player be than the reigning MVP, average 33 points a night? There's just impossible not to be intrigued by it. I've heard a lot of people say the Sixers would never trade Embiid to the Knicks. Let alone, they're not going to trade him at all. They're definitely not going to trade him to the division. Listen, guys like Sean Marks didn't want to trade KD to Phoenix or anywhere else. KD said, "This is what you're going to do, or you're going to lose." Or
I'm going to cause hell. Right.
These are that's what happens with these guys. They don't search the market like, let me see. I think I like this package a little bit more. No, the player says you can trade me here or here. I'll consider this option, but that's it. I'm not.
In many ways, I feel like that's why the whole Ainge and Donovan Mitchell thing was so weird, because Ainge coming in as a new executive, like he didn't care if Donovan Mitchell was going to create hell for him. It didn't really matter. He just got there. But these guys who have jobs, who are trying to keep their jobs, who are trying to please their owners, they have a lot more to lose. So it gives the players a lot more leverage. So I think that's a good point.
100%. So all that being said, do I think Embiid will get traded? No. I don't think it'll happen. Is that something that'll happen next season? Maybe. But I think coming off an MVP season, for him to demand the trade, again, that's the only way it happens. The Sixers are because you can't get equal value back by trading a superstar. Unless, I shouldn't say that. The history tells us that if you wait long enough. But again, is Daryl Morey willing to, trade him for restart the whole rebuilding process once again and kind of go the Nets route and take a Mikal Bridges type player and 4 first-rounders? Again, if it was another GM other than Morey, you'd think he'd want to be in win now mode. All that stuff I assume will be addressed. But again, the same reason we talked about the Knicks being optimistic that the East is, I don't want to say wide open, but who knows what happens with the Bucks. The Celtics are beatable. The Knicks, the Sixers were up in Game 6 of the series. So there's a lot there. I don't think they'll bring back Harden. I think that'll be addition by subtraction. Use that cap space to a player that's better suited, that will show up in a big spot. Give Maxey a bigger role. Maybe flip Tobias Harris. So there's a lot of things that the Sixers can do. That before they throw in the towel and say, we are not going to win with him. Still in the prime of his career. He's been relatively healthy the last few seasons. So I don't think they, unless Embiid says, listen, I'm not playing next season, unless you trade me, so get something from me. That's the only way I see it happening. So we'll see. Do I think I don't think it's likely. I think if he does get traded, the Sixers will look anywhere other than the Knicks. It basically, Embiid has to tell them, I'm only playing for New York. Yada, yada, yada. So work out a 3-team deal or, make a trade, whatever, make it happen. But that's the reality. So.
Yeah, I mean, look, if we thought Danny Ainge was someone that was tough dealing with, I think Daryl Morey won't necessarily be all that much easier. So there's that aspect to it as well. If Embiid says I want to be traded, I can almost guarantee you the Knicks will be on that list. I mean, maybe a list of teams, but the Knicks will be on that list.
100%.
Yeah. Does he get here? That I'm a little more unsure about.
Right.
You know, I think for one, I think that once Embiid goes on the market, I think a lot of teams are offering a lot. Like I think that like KD went for a lot less than I think people thought he would go for, given what the Nets asking price was at the time. Now, in hindsight, it looks like the Nets got quite a lot. But like when we were talking about last season, they were like, we want Jaylen Brown. They want Jaylen Brown and multiple first round picks. Like that was like laughable, you know, by the time he asked for a trade during the trade deadline. So I think Embiid may get a package closer to what they're talking about with KD than what KD actually ended up getting. So if the Knicks are playing in that game, yeah, and he should. I think that he's worth it. I don't think KD was ever worth that.
Agreed.
So I think if the Knicks are playing in that pool, I think they may allow themselves to be outbid. I don't know if a team's offering like another all-star caliber player and multiple first-round picks, that the Knicks are going to have enough at that point. They have all the picks they have, but what if one of these teams offers, hey, we will throw in a Jaylen Brown, or we will throw in X, Y, and Z, a player who's an all-star caliber guy. Then the guys the Knicks have, Jalen Brunson is not going to be in a trade.
That's
Julius
it.
Randle's an all-star that nobody wants. So what happens at that point?
Brunson's the only untouchable player, full stop.
Right.
You put together a package of Mitchell Robinson, Emmanuel Quickly, Quentin Grimes, 4 first-round draft picks. I don't know if any. Listen, I'm just saying, like the Knicks have a lot of stuff to.
They do.
They can make a very interesting offer. Let's just say that.
No, they definitely can. I think my concern would be the teams that come in who have star players already that they are willing to trade. Like the Knicks have a star player that they're not willing to trade. So that kind of makes it, and that becomes, because for Philly, like you said with Daryl Morey, like I don't expect him to say, "Oh, I'm willing to just now start a rebuild." Like I think he's gonna want to still be competitive. Honestly, I think if Embiid asked for a trade, I think he may quit. Like I don't think he'd want to even sit through any of this.
100%. You might be right.
Yeah.
Like seriously, he might just say, "Listen, you know, I'm gonna," because he's, you know, the ownership may force him out too. Because I don't want you thinking, you know, because the fear, if I'm Philly, is I don't want I don't want to go the Utah route. I don't want Larry Martin,
exactly,
because I don't want 37 wins. I want 15 wins, so I can, you know, the process has been
the rebirth of the process would start if they traded Embiid, and I don't know if Morey wants any piece of that. Right. So that becomes an interesting thing. This Embiid situation is going to be interesting to follow. A lot happening in the NBA. We got a lottery this week. We got suspensions to Ja Morant. So this is already going to be a very action-packed offseason. Plenty of coaching firings, including Doc Rivers as well. So we'll be up on top of all of it. That's going to do it for this edition of Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast and Audacy WFAN original. Tommy, let people know where they can find you.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram. This is a podcast, Orange and Blue Bloods, that you can find wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop. And check us out on YouTube. You can check us out on the WFAN channel and the Audacy Sports channel. Thank you guys so much again for checking us out. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you in our next video.